I'm going to be showing a project that has been actually a sort of strangely a work in progress for a lot of years, but is finally turning into architecture. So I thought maybe this would be a good opportunity to chat about it. So I'm Elizabeth Christoforetti, and I have a practice that hovers between my firm, which is called Supernormal, and we do architecture and urban design, and the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where I teach and I run a lab called the Urban Stack Lab. So things that can go into the world and people will pay me to make, I do over here, and things that people won't pay me for but are still interesting or maybe have a different value system live over here. And so this is a project that actually lives in both places. Computer seems to be having the same mood as the train that I was on getting here. Okay, so this project, this is a diagram that I actually show in my classes all the time, but I think it's super appropriate for this project. So, I mean, usually we operate here as architects, right? Like we put projects into the world, of course. And we're always trying to operate on these things over here, like solving climate change and stuff. But in order to do that, we obviously have to operate in the things that we all know about, which are the complicated in-betweens, the capital stacks, technology stacks, and policy frameworks. And I'm really interested in how architecture projects can not only receive information and respond to calls from the constructs here in the middle, the capital, technology, and policy frameworks that we operate within, but how we can also kind of push back up on them and have impact in different ways. So hopefully this project is doing that. So this started with Plan Mattapan. I was one of the consultants along with Mass Design, Grayscale, Tool Design, and RKG in Plan Mattapan. This started a long time ago. This is pre-COVID, and then it really dragged on through COVID. This plan was all of the low-rise date, and this is kind of what it looks like if you're not aware of it. The Mattapan is a neighborhood that has historically been Black and immigrant community. It's one of the highest homeownership rates in the city, which is quite remarkable. The market there is still cold, but there is a reasonably, I think, a fair amount of concern around when that market might tip and what will happen in terms of displacement for the homeowners that are there now. Already we're seeing that the nieces and nephews and daughters and sons of the people that are living there are no longer able to live there. They can't afford it. And so a lot of the questions that we were asking as we were thinking about low-rise urban fabric was not a sort of top-down planning effort. We were saying, okay, here's how we're going to readjust the FAR for the corridors. Instead, we were saying, how do we think about how to do urban design from the bottom up and actually enable the people in the neighborhood to increase the equity in their homes and to provide stability for themselves and for their families. So that was the challenge. And these are the housing types that are there right now. A lot of triple deckers. There are also a fair number of duplexes and old Victorians that have been kind of cut up and turned into other things. They tend to be on fairly large lots. This was the existing zoning when we went into it. You know, it looks very much like a typical zoning map looks in terms of uses and levels of density around housing. This is actually, though, what the fabric actually looks like. So if the one families, single families are light, the two families are slightly darker orange, and the three families are the darkest orange, you can see here that the reality on the ground in Mattapan is quite different. That means that there's quite a bit of non-conforming housing stock there, right? So it's quite diverse, actually. It doesn't necessarily conform to the zoning. And when you look at it, and when we did an additional analysis, which is what's the capacity of the land, and there's a fair amount of vacancy there, we saw an even more diverse opportunity, which is to say that instead of just having 1, 2, and 3 family, there's a lot more capacity that's latent that could be filled in. And so this was, and it's ADUs are blossoming everywhere at this point. Everyone has done an ADU. It seemed like a really radical thing to do in 2019, but it doesn't seem that much anymore. But anyway, of course, the calculation we were doing was how much additional capacity can we add without tipping the balance of the look and feel? How can we keep the identity of the fabric while introducing more density? And so this was some analysis that we did on typical blocks, and you can see here how much room there is left over for something that is about an 850 square foot ADU. This is a vacancy map, but more importantly, when we ran this analysis here, writ large across Mattapan, we found that there were thousands of opportunities for ADUs. And we took this to the community, and what we found, which was, I don't know, it was like this amazing American moment, I think. This woman and several of her friends were very, very excited. I thought this was going to be one of those public meetings where you go in and people are like, that's a horrible idea, don't ever bring this up again. It was totally the opposite. People were like, no, actually, we want to do this right now. We've been really hoping we could do this, and we're trying to figure out how. So if you could just help us, that would be amazing. Zoning, whatever, we want to do it. So could you help us develop this stuff? So it was like this. It was the best public meeting I've ever been to in my life. Long story short, we made recommendations, as one does, and we, at that point, this sort of trickled on into COVID. We ultimately made recommendations. This was obviously before COVID, but we made recommendations to pilot. There were a number of recommendations in the low rise fabric, including other recreational and other use changes. But the long story short, we were going to pilot in an area, and the hope was that we would be able to kind of quickly do this, test this out, see where it would go in a small area with a set of people that were already interested in this, and then go forward. Anyway, that sat on the shelf for a very long time. So the recommendations came out, and you can see here that they of course, they look like recommendations look. Here are how big things are. There were things about ADUs. There was also a budding lot program, which is this thing right here on the bottom. So this was not only a recommendation for an ADU. We found that in a lot of cases, the neighbor, if there's a case of vacancy, the neighbor of the homeowner, or the neighboring parcel of the homeowner with in this case, the little white building, this homeowner often owned the land next door. So we were saying, well, maybe there's a possibility for us to not only recommend ADUs, but also an abutting lot development program, such that the homeowners themselves can catalyze the development and they can also achieve the equity. We knew at that time, and in a very, you can see here, municipal assistance is critical. Like, I mean, how much can the city really do in terms of more than changing zoning? It was a bit naive at that time, but we did know that that like these things are really easy to finance, right? Like, we know that single family homes are successful in America. That works. There are mortgages for them. And we know that these things, these big, either LIHTC or developer driven projects are also, there's funding for those. And there was then, and there continues to be, though, whatever. But the things in the middle, the classic missing middle housing problem, were harder to finance. And we did know that at the time, but we didn't actually know what the solution was. So with RKG, who is our economic development consultant, we did do a fair amount of analysis, which I will not go over. Suffice it to say, there was going to be a gap in funding, and we were trying to figure out, how to help the city begin to catalyze solutions for this. Ultimately, last May, the city did pass the pass zoning. So, sorry, this was in May of 2023. So now in Mattapan, ADUs are as of right, meaning that they can be built without any additional complication. Well, you still have to go through permitting, and there's some problems with the fire department, which we can talk about, but that's part of the issue. But from a zoning perspective, it works now. And so then, we cycled off the project, but this is still an interesting problem to me, because I realized that we've made these recommendations, yay us, and it's worked, and we got it, the city did all of this work to get it passed through zoning, but nobody's going to be able to build these things because they can't figure out how to finance them. And it's, when you look at the areas in the world where these kinds of things, either ADUs or abutting lot programs, are working, they're working in areas with very high incomes. And so in areas that involve middle income people, it was significantly harder. And so we started to think about, well, let's design this house, and let's not, we want to do this. We don't just want to design one, we want to design many of them. So if we have many in mind, how do we start thinking strategically about the factors that have to aggregate together with the architecture? So we want to design a beautiful ADU that is going to be delightful, that is going to help the multi-generational households house their children when they come back, or for them to age up and age out into. We want to have it be a sort of socially connective piece of the tissue. We want it to fill gaps and do all the good things that we had imagined. But there's some other stuff that we need to figure out how to do. So anyway, we made a beautiful plan. I think this is great. We can talk about the plan sometime. It involves all kinds of fancy things like on-site and off-site manufacturing, and there's a bunch of architectural problems baked into this, which I'll cover in a minute. It's 900 square feet, 850 to 900 square feet. It's got a really nice sort of approach, I think, to the way that it might engage socially, the space around it, and become part of the fabric. It's very simple. There's nothing complicated about this in many, many ways. It's just a house. But we quickly realized, as we started to design this thing and started to collaborate a bit more with the city on implementation, in some ways, I don't know that it's officially implementation, but you're suddenly dealing with all of these other things. It's not just architecture. Now we're dealing with all of the other things that caused it, and it suddenly feels like we're boiling the ocean. And so I'm going to try to pull apart the pieces that we're working on right now, both architecturally and as I've started to realize, architecture isn't enough. And so maybe a little bit about the other pieces as well. So this is a diagram of the things that are involved in this little house. And after we made this lovely plan, we realized that in order to qualify for certain subsidies that were going to enable the financing, we had to design a particular kind of envelope that had to involve. So anyway, it sort of snowballs out of control. And so I'll kind of maybe dive into these a little bit. I ended up, but this is like the kind of research that nobody was going to pay me to do. So this I did with researchers at the university. This felt like a good role for institutional contributions to a better world to some extent. So I ended up pulling in researchers from inside our field, so typical people that I would have as a researcher, designers, but also people that I've never worked with before, certainly not in the capacity of design research at a university, people from the world of finance. And so we've started to think about this thing as a kind of package, a vertically integrated piece of architecture that also includes financing, and the policy obviously came first. So I think you can read this. Yeah, you can see these sort of. These little, this circle represents like things that we think are good for architecture to achieve. And in this case, the ADU represented more than architecture. So we're saying middle income equity, flexibility, and security. And in order to do that, it needs to generate rental income. It's tied up here to a bunch of energy subsidies. So in order to qualify for the financing, the energy subsidies here are enabling, and they're enabled by passive home standards. Then you can give them money, and then you can enable this. So there's all of these things, and we had some ideas about programs that we think would work here, that we thought actually maybe we could move towards achieving. And so in this case, what we've been doing is working with a series of local banks convened by the city, and it's trying to create a lending program. And so it's trying to get the banks to agree on that gap, that thing that couldn't be financed before, to actually provide a mortgage, or or some kind of debt and equity tool that looks a little bit like a mortgage to the homeowners here that wouldn't otherwise be able to qualify. On the other hand, we have this whole kind of environmental performance aspect of it. We do want to do good things for the environment, and we want to make sure, because, you know, again, if you can't see it now, but if we don't qualify for the subsidies, it's going to be a lot harder for the homeowners to be able to pay for this. And so we started working on a variety of things up here that would allow for a lot lower energy. So some of the things which I think are quite realistic, and some of the things I don't think are realistic at all. There was a geothermal, district geothermal program that will definitely not happen fast enough, though it would be ideal if it could. There are other ways of thinking about this building because it's so small. You know, I think in our mind, we wanted it to be as dumb as possible in a good way, like a good dumb building, not a smart building. We didn't want it to be smart, you know, because that seems complicated. At the same time, it's kind of undeniable that a lot of the technology that we're using right now, although it maybe is the cause of a lot of the things that we're dealing with right now in terms of climate change, it's also potentially the solution. So there were some strategic areas where we thought we could integrate some good data-driven technologies. And it got us into a whole other web, which I hesitate to even bring up, but this I think it's worth saying in the general trajectory of complexity around this project. We had looked at, this is not my diagram, this is the diagram of a smart house, which we don't want to be, but there's some interesting learning that comes out of it. It's a place called House Zero. It's a lab, another lab at Harvard, and the PI, the principal investigator, Ali Makawi, has been a big supporter of this, and has been trying to figure out how to work with us to, in the simplest possible way, use intelligent passive home standards, but also integrate minimally some data-driven responsiveness so that the HVAC and the energy efficiency, the energy performance will be optimized. I think I might skip this. This was a school sort of thing. Long story short, it turns out that when you start to think about buildings like this, you basically are thinking about human-computer interaction. And it's a very weird thing, I think, to think about buildings in relationship to human-computer interaction, particularly when you have all of these other things packed into it as well. So yet another layer of complexity. But at the end of the day, I think the most important thing that we've been trying to work on is how to create meaningful, dignified, and relevant shelter for people. It's been kind of overwhelming in a way to see how, when you take the blinders off a little bit and you try to understand architecture not only as the thing that we usually do, an asset or a piece of cultural production, or the way that we think, however you think about architecture, but you think about it as a lever for bottom-up change within a community. You can't avoid the complexity, especially not now, knowing what we need to do to achieve energy performance, which is critical, again, not only so that people can enter into this situation, but also so that they can maintain the home in a simple and affordable way over the course of many decades. So I suppose it's the past. I don't know. I mean, the plan Mattapan started many years ago, but this work has been much more recent. It's been a real eye opener for me, and we are now moving towards case studies. So we are trying to build 3 of these, and here's the architectural problem. We're trying to build 3. We need to control our variables because we don't actually know what construction methods and types are going to be best. There is a real challenge with ISD, inspectional services, around fire, actually, trying to figure out how do we avoid sprinklers, and is it possible to avoid sprinklering? Because this is an enormous cost barrier. How do we think about that? How do we think about the balance of on-site and off-site labor? So there are all of these things that now we want to kind of put out into the world in parallel with a really amazing effort by the city of Boston to develop a pattern book. So a set of sort of urban design level plans. So this is what we're doing, and this is now a group of so it's us and my team. It's the city of Boston. It's a group of local banks who are trying to develop this lending product, and it's a group of local builders who are trying to help us assess the right balance and an appropriate construction technique that will sail through permitting going forward and that they feel comfortable with on site. These are some slides that I presented, so we don't need to go through them in detail. Long story short, we're trying to cover these 4 territories, and they're very specific objectives that we need to achieve. If we think about these case studies as pieces of research, actually, that will allow us ultimately to learn about what can and can't be done or what is feasible and optimal, so that we can begin to scale it. It also needs to happen kind of fast, which makes me nervous. So in theory, this is what would happen. We have to learn quite rapidly because because I believe I think we can actually send them to permit in the fall of 2024. So it's quick. There's a conversation to be had, I suppose, about this question of internal ADUs versus attached ADUs and detached ADUs. There are some intricacies around how fire looks at attached versus detached, and how we think about separate entries. Internal ADUs are like their own special breed of, I don't know what, but they're not like attached and detached because they're dealing with existing systems and upgrades to existing buildings. So we're not really dealing with that at all. What we are dealing with is a test. We're trying to control our variables across 3 different construction types. So we're looking at stick, we're looking at panelized, and we're looking at modular. And obviously they afford 3 very different things. Stick has a certain amount of flexibility. It also has a certain amount of risk because of obviously all of the contingencies of on-site construction. Modular, on the other hand, obviously is quite controlled. We have a partner in New York that's going to be working with us on this, and we're moving towards type 1 construction for this to try to avoid some of the sprinkling. It's a lot easier to do in a factory setting, but it drives, you need a crane, first of all, which is suboptimal for people's backyards, and it drives a certain something into the design. And then thirdly, and which I will confess, I think is the most interesting, is panelized. So there are these very, very thick panels with a whole lot of insulation that get flat packed and assembled on site. So the kind of hybrid balance of on-site and off-site construction feels pretty good to me. I like the way that the trades are integrated. But we've been working with manufacturers, and we're finding that they have their own typical details, and they're really grumpy about what we want to design, which strangely is not the case with modular, by the way. But the panelized, I don't know why they all want the houses to look the same. It's like you can't. So anyway, it's a frustration that I don't know how to encounter. I think I need a different manufacturer. We'll be testing these. These look different. These metrics look really different in different cities. And so a lot of our problem right now is trying to figure out who our partners should be on the manufacturing side. Actually, we have a wealth of partners on the local building side. There are a lot of local builders who are really good and almost want to start taking this on as a design, as a develop build. They want to be a kind of development manager for this as well. So this is looking at comparative costs by phase, just to help the various stakeholders understand, and the comparative timelines. I mean, it's as though it's a zero-sum game. I think it's yet to be seen, as things get trucked through Connecticut, what the actual timelines will be. We'll see. But you know, that obviously is something that that we need to think about very carefully. And finally, this is something I've never done before. Developing financial tools and instruments. So this is the capital. In fact, I think I have a one of my research assistants is good at computers. So what is this? This is the Capital Stack tool. So we have done this massive survey of residents in Mattapan that are interested in ADUs, hundreds of people. And some of them have volunteered to continue to go forward and to help us do co-design, not just around the architecture, which it's not a co-design with the community so much, but definitely around the process of getting the architecture into the ground. And so one of the things that we realized we needed to help them understand is how much the subsidies they can qualify for, how much the City of Boston ADU loan program will put in, how much their personal savings and everything else that they can put in will be, and then what the gap is, right? So they need to be able to understand that and visualize it in so much as also our partners do, and then understand what the potential sources of funding are for them on the other side. So we're also developing a little bit of software around this so that people can understand the entire process from financing through permitting, through matchmaking with local builders, so on and so forth, so they can actually get this done. So I curated an exhibition recently, and this was part of the exhibition on the left. This is a fascinating project with a horrible title. It's a collaboration between Buckminster Fuller and June Jordan. And it was happening at a moment in it was in Esquire of all places, but it's a really interesting article. And it's a proposal. It's this sort of modern heroic moment. And it's tackling exactly the same problems that we're trying to tackle. It's trying to tackle equity in relationship to housing, in relationship to what we now think of as systemic bias and historically based racism. And it's trying to take on environmental design. And to some extent, the climate is, as Buckminster Fuller did. And it's just, it couldn't be more opposite. And I look at it and I think, what an incredibly different era of design we're living in right now. If like this is not even, it doesn't even make sense now. Like we can't do heroic, you know, it's like anti-heroic architecture time. And so I suppose the questions on the table for me are like, is it even reasonable to think about architecture in this way? Or is this just way so far out of our lane that it doesn't make any sense? And yeah, I mean, I suppose there are a lot of questions on the table. I can come back to this. This is what we're talking about right now. We're talking about, and I haven't shown all of the drawings that are in progress. Maybe I should have screen capped them for you out of our various software programs. But you know, we're looking at what each of these construction types and methods afford, both in terms of design and how we can make these things remarkable and dignified and providing security and shelter and all the things that houses are supposed to do. Fireproofing strategies, local manufacturing, and building partners. It's hard actually to find a good fit there. Systems integration. We are definitely not designing in a normal client-based relationship here. So how do we think about that? We are designing for scale. And we are also designing with a very particular population in mind. It's for a changing demographic, largely across American middle-class families that tend to be much more intensively middle-class or multi-generational and dynamic. They don't look like the traditional household that maybe we would have considered building for a generation ago. So that's it. It's a very, very small piece of architecture.
Thank you. I start off by a sort of very big picture question, which is, am I correct in understanding that the goal is to basically try to make all of these systems accessible to the homeowners so that they can hire a builder, finance their project, either buy a plan or hire an architect, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, really what we want to do is be able to, because there's no developer in this, we need the homeowner to be able to say, oh, I want to be able to, I want to be able to make this ADU. What do I have to do to make that happen? And so instead of having them have to go through and file and deal with permitting, to deal with, you know, all of the honestly almost impossible financing hurdles, figure out who to build it, all of these things, we're trying to say, no, just we can try, if we can just package it all together and help people have an accessible pathway into it, then that seems like we can actually start achieving these things and getting them done.
So you are then sort of creating a kind of turnkey service where someone could come to you, or if there's a separate entity, like, I want an ADU, and you can be like, sure, here's a catalog, pick one, and then we'll take care of the design, build, the finance, the permitting, all that.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to solve it from different angles. So I don't know that we're turning it into like a venture capital funded company. That's not really where we're headed with it, because we're working also with banks to try to do this. But exactly, totally, exactly. So yeah, so that ultimately it has to be under a single umbrella. And yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Would it ever be published?
Public is
Would
in.
that be a public?
I don't think the city would ever want to hold that. Yeah. I think it would be too much. I think it would have to be a not-for-profit or some kind of B Corp or something like that. That would collaborate widely, you know, with the banks in this case.
Yeah, you could take advantage of grant funding or other programs and pass it too.
Yeah, exactly. Because what we're trying to do right now is actually raise money through the Boston Foundation. So if anyone knows anyone, yeah. But yeah, for those first 3 case studies, you know, I mean, we have these interested property owners, and the question is, okay, well, how do we fill that, like, that capital stack gap for the first 3 homeowners, so that we can actually understand the intricacies of it, and then backfill for the next one, hopefully with some combination of lending, you know, debt, equity, and grants.
Have you found that is in fact the biggest hurdle? It's like capital gap.
Yeah, it is. And I think also just a lot of, I mean, as we know, it's like, it's really hard to estimate. I feel like clients are always asking me to estimate a construction cost. And I'm like, I mean, I don't know, you know, it changes every day. And, you know, there's so many unknowns. So trying to figure out how to even have people know that it's a $225,000, you know, it's some of it's around the estimating and the pre-construction stuff.
What factors would you use to analyze the success of the 3 pilot projects?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So that is something like this. So this is kind of what we're trying to test. So we need to figure out on the financing side, it will work if one of 2 things happens. We can either find alignment with local banks, so that which they seem to want to do, by the way. They seem very interested in this. Local banks and other financing organizations. They want to come together and say, okay, we can use something called a Community Reinvestment Act stuff, right? I mean, there's stuff out there that says in America, we should support people like this. We want to do this. We can come together. So we can figure out how to do that. That's successful. Or to raise a fund so that it can operate on the side, and to help people understand this, and so that it can actually become a platform so that they can access it. So on the financing side, it's about structuring the lending and the financing, and education, really. The policy side is actually alignment. It's alignment between bridging the gap between, if we can, like right now, the city is creating a pattern book, which is really great, because they're showing, you know, people going into the future, like, well, here's how far away, and, you know, here are the setbacks, and here's a diagram of this. And if you have this kind of, if it's this close to the house, it needs to be sprinklered. And if it's X, Y, or Z, right, it needs to have a driveway, it's this wide, unless it's in these conditions. but that doesn't really solve for a permit set. So trying to figure out how we can merge what's allowable with what is feasible and viable to build is another huge metric. So that would be a thing we need to achieve. And then variables on construction, I think we really do need to figure out which construction type and method are most appropriate and whether there are local partners that are going to make this work. And if we are going to offend, like where that balance lies, because you don't want to pull, I think you don't want to pull all of the local labor off, but there's also room for a diversity of approaches. So which one is best for which conditions? I think that is a set of variables that we're trying to figure out how to control right now. Because in reality, when you design something using modular construction, it just isn't going to look like a stick-built home. You know, it can't. And so you really have to design it the way that it wants to be designed, you know, like a module wants to be a module. So we got to figure that out. And it also needs to be like good to live in. And the jury is out. The survey was not a small task, actually. It was a year-long effort. And there are a lot of opinions about who this might be for and what the needs might be for an aging community, for instance, in terms of accessibility or storage or anything else.
Did you say earlier that your assessment was that of the three different construction types that they were effectively the same cost, or?
We don't really know. We haven't been able to assess, and we've talked with a lot of people, and it's just the math is way too fuzzy. Everyone's like, yeah, it's going to be, $200,000. Okay.
No, because usually you'll do a panelized or modular construction for schedule, right? To speed it up. You would imagine that there would be cost benefit over stick built where, you're putting up each individual 2x4 but the stick built has potentially very local labor, which is part of the equation as I see it, right? As you don't necessarily want to ship the modular from Kansas.
Yeah. Totally. No, I'm with you. I interestingly, when we've been asking around, stick is coming in lower than.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's real.
Yeah.
It's really. But you're right. I think that's right.
And really repetitive stuff, right? The panelized and modular probably wins. The bigger it gets, the more it wins in the cost model.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you can have 75 families that, and you have a trusted manufacturer. Yeah.
Do you have labor issues also, like with the trades, if it's
it's not big. I mean, this is a great question. We've been wondering the same thing because the city seems invested in the possibility of having offsite. Because there is a kind of perceived simplicity to it for the homeowner. It's a lot easier to have a home show up on one day and be like in the ground 3 days later, like occupied, than it is to watch it come to fruition over the course of 18 months. But right now they're very, very small, so no one's going to put the rat out, in front of one house. But like when it gets bigger, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Biggest hurdle is funding, and presumably the biggest piece of the cost is the construction. And the biggest unknown is the construction cost. I mean, it seems like you kind of have to just
do it.
Hitch your wagon to a builder and figure out how to drive the cost down low enough to make it viable.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think most of these we're not gonna know this until we do it. Like I honestly just don't think it's gonna happen until we put it in the ground.
But it seems like the builder then should be the primary owner of this nonprofit or organization, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like this build develop model actually for like local economic development feels super promising.
Well, the question is who's the client, right? Because I think you have to decide who's the who is the client ultimately? If the client is the person who is getting the rental income, making certain decisions, like, you know, are you offering finished variable? Like, like this idea of a package service and a package option. It seems like you have to also figure out like how packaged,
Yeah,
how set. Is
yeah,
there one single option with one set of finishes, one set of plans, one set of whatever? Or maybe there's the three. There's like the one for the nuclear family, the one for the aging grandparent, the
mhm,
one for single person. But like there's so many variables right now, it's hard to know like who the client is.
yeah. No, I think it's right. I think that one of the variable to this earlier question about the variables, they're all going to be 900 square feet. They're all going to be 2-bedroom because it seems that that is a gap that needs to be filled. And if you're going to put this big thing in, you might as well get that extra bedroom. I think that it's not, like, I don't even know if client is the right word for it. I've been trying to figure this out because if what you're saying, Sam, is right, and in a way the local builder becomes also the developer, then actually what they're doing is kind of creating a product with a set of services. And if depending on how
But then
you,
they're the client, like they want to make this profitable. It's only beneficial to them if it's a profitable option, right?
Well,
They're only the developer in the traditional sense that they also own the land, right? It is more of a product, right? If you're selling a product to a homeowner, you're covering the construction, the design, the permitting, all of it.
But you as the builder are only going to offer a set product that makes you money,
yeah,
right? So that's not,
Yeah, well, I
that's
guess
not a
that's why I was saying
pro
like
bono.
that.
yeah,
This umbrella organization
Yep.
could be a nonprofit, right? A nonprofit can do construction.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it's, well, yeah, I suppose then that's a different thing, right? So, but that in my mind still like begs the question, who's the client, right? It's like, is it a developer who's a nonprofit who has a social ethos, or is it a developer who's looking to make money?
make money. Yeah,
Right, so that's different.
well,
You say client, I still don't totally understand what you mean.
Who's making the determining decisions about it? Like, who's saying, I want one, I'm adding to cart, and then as a result of adding to cart, I'm making certain decisions about it. Is it the person who owns the land?
Yeah.
It sounds like
Yeah, it sounds
ideally
like that's
it
the
is.
ultimate goal, yeah.
Yeah, but then I'm still curious how the sort of the deliverer is actually offering it.
so the business school has gotten involved, and their recommendations are fascinating. And it's very much along these lines. So I've had some students use this to apply for a sort of social impact grant, and they're on the short list. So we've gotten some advising around this, and the recommendation is definitely don't have clients and definitely don't use a product as a way to make money, because you're never going to be profitable if you think that you're going to sell an ADU and make a profit. What you should do is think about the financing as the tip of the spear. And so you could think about it as some sort of hybrid condition where the entity that is creating the ADUs is actually also operating a set of services, and they own the ADU, and it could be almost a rent to own model, even though it's on the land. The homeowner is kind of gradually acquiring the equity, and if that entity also finances it, then that's also a lot of interest, and that's actually a really good business model, because then you're controlling the financing. You're providing services for the homeowner that they really need, because they need to put somebody in there and make sure that it's rented. They need to make sure that it's maintained. They need to do these things. And so over the long term, you basically you're like an asset manager. You have a portfolio of these things that over time you're selling back to the homeowner. A little mind blowing for me. It's very similar to the Cambridge Housing Authority, actually, in some ways, from my understanding. I know enough to be.
But then again, it's still like, to my mind, it's still like who's the client? like, cause then the owner is, I'm literally thinking about like, who's deciding what it looks like inside. What it looks like outside, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good, well, it's, I guess that question there is like, how much variability can such a thing tolerate? I mean, like blue homes and everything we know of that like spontaneously combusted because of variability, like we kind of know that that doesn't work.
But
So-
like Cambridge Housing Authority is not, it is not fussed about the detailing.
Yeah. But they're building bigger homes too. I mean, they're bigger buildings, but you're right. Yeah. I think I mean,
Yeah.
long story short, yeah, I think the level of the like, I don't think everyone gets to choose whether they want to have like Formica or, you know, whatever. It's
Right.
yeah.
Right.
I think probably it's set.
Right, and then the design problem is the financial model, not the building.
No, I think the building is still a huge design problem. It's a really big design problem in my mind. I mean, I'm finding it very challenging actually right now because as we negotiate across these construction types and we think about what they can really do, and we think about, you know, how to do this in a way that is as cost effective as possible, but still really great and energy efficient. Like actually it is hard. It's just that you only do it once. You don't do it every time there's a new building. So in theory, you solve that problem once, like we solve the problem and figure out where the issues are. We correct them. And so on project 2.
We talked to Geologic in Maine, like those folks are doing anything set. They like a set, do folks know that?
I don't know this company. Geologic.
Geologic,
Okay.
I think it's like capital G, capital O, Logic, but they have, I think they have a set of, it's kind of like a Blue Homes or,
Yeah.
they have like a set of like 5 products you can buy, but they are expensive and they're not big.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the aspen, this is the pine cone, you know, like.
Yeah.
Pick your one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it strikes me that the level of variability has to be very low,
Yeah.
at least initially.
it is, but the thing is like what's interesting about them, and I think just from a price perspective, because I called them once to like ask about a house, and I was like close to $1 million for a compact 3-bedroom.
Oh my God.
Right, like, because they're coming at it from a like capital D design
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah.
I think, right, that's my advice, but I think it's like, they're attractive. They're good designs. Right?
Yeah.
And they're thinking about solar, they're thinking about geothermal. I don't know if they all have geothermal capacity, but they could be interesting to talk to.
Yeah. No, that's a great call. Yeah. Thank you for that.
What about a nonprofit like Habitat for Humanity? Or that out there, I mean, it's not quite related to what you're doing, they have a different focus,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of what they do that seems translatable to how people doing ADUs because they think small as well as.
No, I did speak with them actually. And there is actually a lot of alignment and overlap there. And I think there's a lot to be learned, which I still haven't fully done. So it's a button I think that still needs to be pressed a little bit further. They seem to be, I was sort of surprised to find how loosely connected Habitat Humanity is to each other. Like it's bound together by a process for bringing communities together more than anything else, which is super interesting. But I think, you know, it's really relevant to this question of how you like match people, how you take people that need a thing and match them with people that can help make a thing. And do it in a way that utilizes community resources. Yeah, it's like a process. It's a fascinating process design. Yeah, I should pick that back up. Actually, I let that go cold during the pandemic. Yeah, it's a good call.
That volunteer construction labor, that's what I always think of.
Not entirely, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of it.
Yeah, it's like a core, you know,
Oh, they have like,
group.
actually, and then like,
That,
for the community come.
yeah,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
future owner. My sense is.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yes, right.
You're engaged. You're embedded in it. You have a desire to care for what you're building.
I mean, the other thing that's really interesting about that model is that they also build in, which I think we need to pay attention to as well. Like how do you care for it after it's built? You know, there's a kind of maintenance aspect to it, which I think is actually really important.
Especially with the systems you're talking about.
Yeah, but it's training for, in that case, the owner.
Hmm.
Training.
Yeah.
But the model of having someone who actually owns it, at least for a period, like this idea of the rent to own model, like that could be very interesting because from a maintenance and operations perspective,
Yeah.
that person will definitely have a substantially easier time scaling across.
Yeah. 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 I think so too. I also just like this idea that like we stay invested in our architecture after it's built. You know, it's kind of like a nice, how does that, chain of care work? Nice.
Are there any lessons from like zip car?
Probably.
I think
Probably.
just cars in general. I mean, the whole sort of customization and manufacturing and all of that and financing, they figured that out. They figured the financing, the
Yeah.
application,
Yeah, I feel like
all of that.
there's like this like social do-gooding piece that I feel like is part of this, right? It certainly seems like it's part of how it would be presented. Is that?
Yeah. No, it's accurate. It's accurate. But it does have the potential to make money if you do it the right way. And so it's a question of like, who is going to do this? What kind of entity? How is it structured? And actually the car thing is an interesting analog because I was just speaking with I forget his actual title. He's the head of development for the city of Miami. And he connected me with somebody who he was sort of he had this array of examples, including like GMAC, which is the financing for GM cars, I think. But basically he was like, yeah, that's what it is. I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. It's just like an entity that has like a big pot of money that like lends to people and then takes interest. Like, just not that complicated. So there's except you have to, raise $4 billion or something, but besides that, yeah, I think. And in terms of simplicity too, like Tesla doesn't allow endless optionality, or whatever, GM.
Is there any model of how this affects property value?
There are questions around how it gets assessed that are a little bit above my pay grade. Because that's a municipal decision,
Tax breaks for them.
Yeah, there are. So there's among that suite of like financing, like how do you make it financeable and how do you make it sustainable? There are questions about how assessments are handled, how taxes are handled. There's a grant program. But yeah, no, it's a really good question.
Los Angeles had a big initiative for ADUs, because there's such a housing crisis out there, and I think there was a stop to it, but I don't know if there's any valuable information on what they used as models. I think like in West Hollywood specifically, there was a big ADU, movement probably right around the same time. It was right before COVID.
Yeah, we've been looking at it. The data that we've been seeing is that it turns out that like ADUs are wildly popular with people who are earning a lot of money, and then not with people who like make a normal amount of money. So that's hold on. If you look at the data from Seattle and LA, you basically see there's a direct correlation between the number of ADUs being built and the local income levels.
Is there a scenario in which the owner also occupies the ADU to some capacity? Like, does it matter from a financing perspective? Because like the thing is if the financing is predicated on the rental income, what happens when the homeowner builds it and says, actually, here's all that extra space I could live in?
Yeah, the woman who working with, her name is Shari was saying, she's very interested in this question of like, lending qualifications and valuations. And so what we found through our survey is that the homeowners, like there are several different types of people, but many of them have an enormous amount of equity in their existing home, but they're retired, so they don't really have an income, and they don't necessarily even have credit. So there's a question of like, how do you, and they're already multi-generational households. So they're like, it's like they own a duplex or a 3-family, and and the way that the banks are currently assessing their capacity to borrow is around their income and equity and credit. But we're trying to figure out, and what the banks are trying to figure out is, can they also take into account the like total household income? If it's going to be a total household project, and how do you ensure that there's a just valuation rather than something that's been suppressed by other market dynamics that are kind of biased and unfair? So yeah, I mean, there are many people who want to live in it, or want to have, a niece or nephew that won't necessarily pay rent. And so it becomes one of those factors within the capital stack of like, well, what can you put up, and what's the collateral, or how do you ensure, how do you de-risk basically?
I mean, models I've looked at, instead of just leasing or rental, something which is like a condo model. Within the same building or a separate unit. Fit all of the different models.
Oh, that's interesting. So like almost as though if you're a homeowner and you own the property, could you basically develop something on your property and then sell it?
Yeah, you have to divide the property.
It's like a parcelization.
Property and that common thing, part of it, at least, so it's very good.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good idea. So it's so funny that you bring that up. I never thought about this in the context of the ADU, but when we were looking at the strategies for how to increase density in a reasonable way, one of the things that we were not successful in achieving was parcelization of wide plots. So that we could do what you're saying, but it's much better in the form of an ADU actually, because it's a back front model in condoizing. That's a really good idea, David.
Well, and you don't actually need to split the lot. Condos on a single plot.
Right.
That's true.
You gotta look at how
But it becomes it's just your shared property.
Condo
Yeah.
has plenty of triple
Yeah.
headers.
You're right. Yeah.
in a different way. You have a neighbor across the street who had a normal house that you have a larger front, it's a beautiful Bible in the back. And you live in the back and at the front, and the architect come in and switched it up, so he made the back into a condo. Sold that, lives upstairs in the main house now and rents out the ground floor. Actually, in this case, the daughter of their.
That's a really good idea. Okay, I'm gonna write that one down. That makes it much more viable, actually, for somebody who needs to get more liquid more fast.
Also gives in most markets these days, it gives a certain amount of certainty at the point in time the loan gets paid back.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. That really de-risks it for the bank. Yeah. It's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah.
We should end on that note. I mean, we just solved it. You're welcome.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of strangely unarchitectural problem to bring to an architectural sort of thing. But thank you. These are really thank you, Sam, for the opportunity. And thank you for all of the great recommendations. This is very helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for coming and stay tuned. I don't know that we actually have our next presenter finalized, but it'll be unveiled in a very dramatic way, I'm sure. And yeah, we'll keep things going.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.